with our one flat, we were able to help this family get back together. And here you have this government agency being paid $1,300 each kid each month. That's like $250,000 that they made, that they profited from the family for the duration of the case. It was about a 2-year case or longer. And it makes me lose respect for the powers that be who are pumping all this money into child welfare, a policing system. And they're policing families and separating them. And with what little we have, we're able to reunify, their mistake or what they're making is a bigger problem.
Welcome back to Cream City Social. And this time, Daniel and I sit down and have a heartwarming, heartbreaking conversation with two of the most love-filled people I've ever had the chance to meet. You've already met one of them, Amada, as she talks about reunifying a family of 9 after they're separated from their mother by Child Protective Services and put into 3 different foster homes here in Milwaukee. The other love-filled human is Lincoln, who has been with Casa Maria for what's getting close to 25 years. And as you listen, I'll let you be the judge, but I bet he makes it to 50 years. Daniel, what'd you think of our conversation?
I thought this was a really interesting and, yeah, like you said, a really heartwarming and at times heartbreaking conversation.
It was.
I was really shocked to learn how a lot of the institutions that are supposed to be helping families in Wisconsin are actually doing a lot of harm. It was really eye-opening to hear that these things are going on. In our last episode, we talked a little bit about mutual aid and the issues with traditional charity, the power imbalances, the reliance on wealthy donors, and the issues that causes. And I think as you listen to this episode, you'll really understand why. Charities, though often well-intentioned, can have a lot of pitfalls. And you'll understand often why government social programs as well aren't adequate to meet our needs. It was really interesting to see these ideas in action rather than just in theory, and I hope we see more of these projects in the future.
Hear, hear. And before we get to the conversation, I wanted to gush a little and say that this interview is exactly what we hoped Season 2 could become when we started in January. A platform to share the stories of the people actually building the better world we all want to see here in Milwaukee. The work Amada, Lincoln, and the whole family at Casa Maria is doing isn't the work that makes flashy headlines or pulls in big dollar grants from foundations or becomes a tax write-off for a big corporation. The work they're doing is the work that keeps families together, our city and our neighbors safe, and begins to build the world that we all want to live in. Anything you can do to support them would be very much appreciated. Their website will be in the description. And with that, here is a very honest conversation with 2 people making positive change in Milwaukee. Well, welcome. Thanks for coming and sitting down and talking to us today, guys.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
This interview has been kind of a long time in the making. I want to say we first talked about 2 months ago over Skype. Remember, I was in a dingy laboratory of sorts in the off-campus engineering building, and I looked like I was a mad scientist and had books everywhere and real industrial. But it's so good to finally sit down and get to talk to you guys. I think COVID has messed us up a couple times and rescheduling of sorts. But we're really excited to talk about the Casa Maria Catholic Workers group that you guys are a part of. And maybe to kick things off, we could talk just a little bit about what the organization is and then how you guys came to it, because you guys have been there for quite some time, and it seems like once Casa Maria gets their hooks into you, You don't leave. You like the community too much. So if we could explore that for a little bit.
Sure. I mean, Casa Maria, it's, as you mentioned, it's a Catholic worker house. And so it's part of a larger movement of Catholic worker houses that movement started during the Great Depression in the 30s, but our community started in 1966, and it was started by Michael and Annette Cullen. Michael was from Ireland. His wife was from northern Wisconsin, and they were inspired by the work of the other houses in this movement. And I think partially what inspired them is it's kind of a mixture. Many of the houses and communities will either have soup kitchens or will be a space where families can stay that don't have another place to stay. It's also usually accompanied by communal living and an emphasis on also trying to address the issues that are going on at the time that might be causing these problems. And so when the house initially started in the 60s, both Michael and Annette Cullen were very involved with the movement with Father Grappi to desegregate the south side of Milwaukee. And they were both very much involved in anti-Vietnam War protests. And so initially, actually, we were in a building on the south side. Most people might think, oh, that's why it has the name Casa Maria. But remember, at the time, it was all white. It wasn't desegregated yet. But it happened to be in an old convent that was owned by the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And it was a place for migrants who were passing through Milwaukee to have a place to stay. And that's why we have the name, even though about a year or so later it moved to the north side and ended up being more of our main work being a place for families who need a place to stay, not necessarily Spanish speaking, but it does cause confusion. We'll get at least a call a week where someone's assuming that the person answering the phone speaks Spanish. Sometimes that's true, but not always. So that's kind of its roots and how it started. And now we have 4 kind of Victorian houses on North 21st Street, just northwest of the Marquette Bubble, where our main work is taking in families, but also working on a variety of justice issues that I'm sure we'll get into as this conversation
So in addition to providing material things, there's also an activist element to it.
Correct. Like, not everyone who's part of our community kind of participates in the activism, but it's definitely part of all of our publications. It's on our website, and many of the folks are involved in activism on a weekly and sometimes daily basis.
What kind of things are you trying to achieve?
Through the activism?
World peace. Say world peace,
world
please.
Peace.
Mostly anything that we do surrounds justice for the poor. And so you will catch many of us at Black Lives Matter, events, reproductive right events. And most importantly, right now, we are focusing on child removal cases in the city and around the country. We also have many anti-war pacifists in our group. So there's a mixture of us we believe in many of the causes that, help people and bring justice to the people.
I thought the pacifism thing was really interesting. I hadn't heard that before, but it makes complete sense when you think about it. Mm-hmm. Did I hear that sometimes when Marquette's ROTC is drilling, they'll be...
Well, they could be drilling, but normally it's on sometimes a monthly basis. A few of us from Casa Maria will go down to Marquette's campus, often on Wisconsin Avenue, sometimes in front of their ROTC building, and hold up signs. And at other times throughout our history, we've maybe done sit-ins at the library or in the union there, and tried to raise awareness. Casa Maria is part of the Catholic worker movement now. Catholicism itself isn't necessarily known or doesn't have a reputation as a pacifist religion, but our movement does. Its founders were pacifists. And so most of the folks who are part of the movement are pacifist and trying to actively work in nonviolence. And so to see this kind of what most people think of when they think of Catholic education in southeastern Wisconsin is they not only have ROTC, but they actually host it. So, if you're an ROTC here at UW Milwaukee, you're going to be going down to Marquette for much of your training. So it's the host site for many universities. When they think of Catholic education, when they think of Marquette, they think of training for war. And so that's something that we find at odds with, for those of us that are Catholic in the community, we find it at odds with our values.
It feels really odd. I went to their open house for graduate school, and their whole 2-hour spiel was about community and taking care of each other and being there for one another. And then you're training people for war right afterwards. It does seem a little bit strange.
Yeah, and the amount of money that goes into funding the war is just, it takes from the fact that we should be offering housing to families, and we should be offering social services instead of bombing other countries and terrorizing other people.
And maybe that'll go into, we were talking about it earlier, how you guys don't take money from any government agencies and how it's all self-funded. And even, I thought before this, you guys had salaries or were paid a little bit for your work at Casa Maria. Not the case at all. And so it's a deliberate choice by the organization.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's a deliberate choice. It feels really good to do what we do and be unpaid. And it's shocking.
I was asking you how you survive.
Yeah. It's just one of those things where, I was raised Catholic, and my mom would always tell me, and I am Catholic now, my mom would always say, God will provide. And we feel that way in community. For some, just we are able to do what we do because we just have, we make do with what we have. And for us, it's an abundance, and it's really amazing. It is like a miracle. It feels really good to be able to make do with what we have and to share it with the community. It feels good to be able to do that when you look at society and people are just so greedy and they think they don't have enough. And then we know that the better way is to do it unpaid. It's better that way because then we're not influenced by the people paying us, and we're much more influenced by the people we are working with and helping.
And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but Child Protective Services, where if you did take money from the government, that could give you some conflict in these Child Protective Services cases.
Yes.
You advocate for.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We have a case that we'll talk about. It's a pretty extraordinary case, and it'll really demonstrate why it's best to kind of just separate the two. Well, how we did a better job of helping a family of 9 children. And we are unpaid. The people paid were not able to help this family. They exploited them. So we'll go into that whenever.
Yeah. And I'll just add, for those that are part of the Casa Maria community, there are those that live outside it and help, and there are those who live in the community and help. And so, no one is paid, but those that live in the community do get room and board. But it's, it's room and board where you're also living in community, and you share a bathroom and you share living spaces and you have your own bedroom, but otherwise privacy can be at a premium at times. So it's not like you're giving your own flat or your own apartment. It comes with the difficulties of having roommates.
So there is sort of a community bonding there. You were telling us off mic that a lot of the people that live in the community are able to help each other as well. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, what's the daily life like in one of these houses?
Sure. So the way that we kind of work the main house, Casa Maria, is we do divide the day up into kind of 3 shifts that are each 4 to 5 hours long, so that someone's always there to answer the phone. If there's someone staying at the house that has a question or needs something that we can provide, take donations at the door, process donations, all that stuff. And so someone will always be there, and there's someone who's there overnight also. But none of us are trained social workers. We're just more, the thing that we have gotten good at is providing food and providing a place to stay. I'd say with the families who stay with us, they are often a resource to each other. They're the ones that, if someone's looking for affordable housing, the moms could warn each other of, well, this is a slumlord. You want to be wary of that person. The rent's cheap, but you're going to pay for it in the end. Or, a friend of mine got a decent paying job here and the hours are decent. They won't change the hours on you all the time. And
whenever there's any openings for low-income housing, we spread the information. The moms make us aware. We make them aware.
Yeah. So it really is. It's a collaborative effort. Without the help that the moms provide each other and the information and help they provide us, we wouldn't be able to do what we do as effectively.
One interesting thing about your organization that you were telling me is that it's kind of decentralized. There's not a designated leadership.
Yeah, if anyone listening to this wants to really confuse the person at Casa Maria answering the phone right now, just call and ask to speak to the director, and there'll be a pause while they decide what to tell you. If you ask to speak to the person in charge, they'll just say, that's me, because whoever's answering the phone, they're the one in charge at the moment. But otherwise, we have a weekly meeting where we gather together and we make our decisions by consensus. So there is no director, there's no one. Even though I've been involved going back to 1998, and Ahmad has been involved since 2015, and someone who's been involved there for a year, when it comes to our making decisions in our meeting, everyone's kind of on the same wavelength, the same stature of power and putting forward their voice.
And why do you do things this way? What kind of advantages do you think that gives?
I mean, I'll give the example of there is a homeless shelter in Milwaukee that the boss for these social workers, the manager, I suppose, said you should invite people from Casa Maria and other organizations so that you know what's going on at their organization. But their manager didn't show up, so I actually got to hear a lot about their issues with working at their homeless shelter. And like one of the big things was, at that time, they had this time limit. I don't remember at the time, let's just say it was 5 months. And they were like, we know if we had an extra month, we could place a lot more of these families. And their kind of arbitrary number for how long a family could stay there was probably based on decent information, 5 years previous. But things had changed, benefits had been cut, and, it took families a little longer. And so one of the things that we ended up coming out of that meeting was, I let them know that we are a place that they could refer families if that arbitrary 5 months came and they needed like an extra 2 weeks, they could just stay with us for 2 weeks without a lot of disruption. And other than, of course, having to move. But that was, so at a place like Casa Maria, if we were noticing that as workers, someone would just bring it up at a meeting and we'd all be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's extend this or change that policy. And we can kind of do it because everyone's working on the ground.
So it kind of prevents this thing where you have decisions handed from someone who doesn't have a lot of experience in the field. I think we've all kind of experienced that in our jobs or daily life before. So yeah.
Once or twice.
It's interesting to me because I think from a young age, we're kind of instilled with this idea that there has to be a leader and that organizations organizing this way can't work. So it's interesting to see that there are really existing organizations that are organized this way and are effective.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The majority, basically, what happens is that the majority consensus decides. And it makes us have to be very persuasive, and it makes us have to be very polite to each other and to approach each other in a way that if we do want an idea to get passed, then we convey it in a fair way so that it's the best decision for the community and not just one person. And then because there's many of us, it gives an opportunity for people to speak up on behalf of the moms. We also take input from the moms in the home. We have a box we check every week so that we get their input, and any criticism or questions or concerns, then it's addressed.
What's the latest criticism?
I'd say
things are pretty cool lately.
Yeah, most of the time it might be, oftentimes people just let us know, but maybe sometimes someone knows that the person on the house doesn't give rides, but they could really use a ride for something. And so they know if they write the note and put it in the box, they all get brought up at the meeting. So, and then when we're meeting on Monday, they'll be like, so-and-so needs a ride and blah, blah, so and I'd say it often gets used so people, they thought of something, they just write it down, throw it in there, and they know we won't forget to bring it up because it's on paper.
Yeah. So we're pretty organized and we meet frequently, meeting on a weekly basis. It's a time for me when I get to meet with people who I'm most like, and who have the, most ideals that I have. We're not all the same. We all branch out in different areas as well when it comes to political ideas or any other social ideas. But I really do like the group of people I work with and get to talk to them on a weekly basis, because you get so, the mainstream's just so much different. So then it's nice to meet. So I enjoy meeting on a weekly basis. And I think that it is a pretty cool experience to be part of the community. It's awesome. Like you say, it would be awesome if things were done this way throughout society.
Mm-hmm. It at least seems like there's a lot less factionalism or like internal rifts this way.
Where do most of the people in the community come from? What background brings you to Casa Maria?
Well, my mom was an activist. She came from Mexico, moved to Chicago. She moved to Cabrini Green, and she made her way up north. She was a young lord, so my mom was very political woman, and I was fortunate to know some of the activists at Casa Maria throughout the community. That's Don Timmerman. And my aunt lived on the block across the street. I think I may have been like 6 years old. And my cousins and I would knock on Casa Maria's door to get ice cream because we knew they had some, and they would share with the kids on the block. And then eventually my aunt was evicted across the street and moved into Casa Maria. So I would visit my cousins and when they stayed there. And it was just this amazing Victorian house with a lot of toys.
I was going to say, it's really pretty, your house is.
Yes. And so it's a great place. As a kid looking in, I don't know what other children, how they feel about it. But I think it is a big, huge home. And coming back as an adult, I went to Marquette for broadcast journalism and electronic communication. We were required to do service learning hours, and I wanted to do my hours at Casa Maria. And also was approached, once I graduated, I started to do supervised visits for families who had their kids removed. Oh. I did that for a couple years. I didn't feel real good about what was going on.
That sounds tough.
Yeah, and I knew that the people were being they were being oppressed and exploited. And so Casa Maria kind of I started a support group, and they heard about the support group and invited me into the community to kind of operate with them as a community. And once that happened, I was able to help a lot of families in a different way, because we're now offering housing to the families who are having their children removed. I also provide case management, and we provide different services, we provide different things like furniture. Whenever a mom gets a new apartment and needs her house furnished, we're able to do that because we have a furniture shed. We have a guy who does deliveries. And once that happened, I think that the things that I was doing alone as an activist, it was really challenging and daunting. And so I got invited into the community in 2015 to do that. But looking back, I just feel like being at Casa Maria was always in my destiny, because I went to preschool on the corner at Highland Community Center. when it was a really small school. And my aunt lived on the block and moved into Casa. So it just feels very much like I belong there. And I don't plan to leave. I'll be there forever.
I really liked what you said about finding a community and then the work getting so much easier. When you try to fight the world all by yourself, you're probably going to lose, and it's gonna tear you up, and you're going to cry. It's tough.
I was a very depressed activist when I wasn't part of the Casa Maria community. That was that had been more like something like 5 years in, because I began my work in 2010 as an advocate to families who have their children removed. But as soon as I joined the community, the other community members were very concerned because they had received calls all the time from caseworkers trying to remove a mom's kids because of homelessness or other allegations. And, they were very happy to have someone come in and help specialize in that area. So
why don't we turn to you, Lincoln? How did you get to Casa Maria?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Green Bay. I'm from a white middle class background. And so my road came through books a little bit more. I was really into my Catholic faith growing up and in high school, and started going to the county library and just looking at any book on theology that looked interesting. And one of the books I happened to pick up...
That's dangerous.
Yes.
That's really dangerous.
Knowledge can be dangerous.
Now you're writing books that look interesting
yes.
in theology.
But there was one of the founders of the Catholic worker movement was Dorothy Day, and I happened to come across her book, and it really changed my outlook of like how Catholicism could look if it was practiced to its best ideal. And so, reading her book and reading about, she put a huge stress on community, and she's the one who started the first Catholic worker house to help house people in New York. Initially, she had met up with a French peasant, and they had put out a call for kind of the bishops in the United States to do this, and they weren't.
Oh, really?
And that winter, when it was extremely cold in New York, and some of the people that they were kind of meeting on the street, some of them had died because of the cold. She just at that point decided, I can't wait for others to do this. She just scrounged up as much money as she could from everyone she could find, and found an apartment building that was mostly vacated because of evictions, and just started renting out places. And that became kind of the first house, and then others were inspired and started doing similar things. So I had read this book of hers, and it really it's resonated with me more than any other book I've read. And
how old were you?
At that time, I probably would have been 16 or 17.
Most impactful book at 16 and 17.
And so then I came down to Milwaukee, went to college here at UW Milwaukee. And I'd say at that point, I was a little more shy. I'm still more of an introvert. I'm just kind of forced extrovert now. And so it was only after my junior year that I knew there was a Catholic worker house here and decided to check it out. And actually, I knew from another publication that they had a monthly gun protest outside of one of the local gun shops in Milwaukee. So I just decided to bike down to the gun shop and meet them there. And so I met as Don Timmerman, who's been mentioned a few times, and his wife, Roberta Thurston, and they were there, and it was just the three of us, and we're holding signs over a lunch hour. And, I've now done that, I don't know how many times over a lunch hour on a monthly basis here and there. And that was one of the only times that a police officer showed up, and I had never dealt with the police before. And I was, he was making fun of us, and because he was going to go inside, and I don't know if he was going to do shooting practice or get some bullets, but, he was
making fun of you guys?
He was making fun of us, and it was very intimidating for me. They had dealt with that a lot, but for me, it's like my first time protesting, and the police are like...
shaking.
Yeah, the police are there heckling us. And so then that was in June, and by the end of the summer, I'd started visiting and helping out and moved in, and that was 1998.
1998.
Never left.
Yes.
So you work more with the day-to-day of the houses, keeping them going, operating, thriving community. What are you doing lately with that? How has COVID maybe impacted that?
COVID has been a great difficulty for for anyone living in community, and thankfully we've not had any serious outbreaks. But essentially during COVID, we stopped. There used to be like a local Quaker group that would come and make homemade macaroni and cheese. I mean, they've been coming since I think the early '80s, and so that
And
stopped.
chili.
Yeah, and homemade chili, and that stopped for like the first time ever. And a lot of folks who would kind of maybe come in from time to time, we really had to make sure we were limiting things. We used to have Marquette students come, and we had kind of organized 3 nights a week an after-school program for the kids, and so we had to stop that from happening. But the other thing that we've had a couple workers come down with COVID, but thankfully they both caught it early and then isolated themselves. And only one family that's had COVID. We've, for families coming in, we've kind of really suggested that if they're not vaccinated, to get tested within a couple days of moving in, and offered a $50 incentive to just get tested. And the only time we've had a family move in that had COVID, thankfully, they got tested the day that they were moving in and saw that they had COVID. So really, we had them isolated in their room. And that time, masks were kind of optional outside of your room. But for the next 10 days, it was like if you leave your room, you have to wear a mask. And thankfully, no one else got COVID.
That's really kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's another one of those things where we have miracles. we don't know how to explain how it happened, but it just works out for us.
Yeah, 4 families, 4 houses, 16 families, all interchanging all the time. That's crazy.
We were very careful. We are very careful with like as he said, we're testing families when they come in, and we incentivize their time and when waiting in line. And of course, in the beginning of COVID, those lines were atrocious. So we just wanted to consider that. So I think we do, as a consensus, we make good plans to keep everyone happy and safe.
But yeah, it's cut into community life also. With COVID, we still meet once a week. And even though most of us are within a block of each other, we're still meeting on Zoom, just to help prevent contact. And, even if I wasn't on the house for my shift, I'd often just go and say, oh, how are you doing? And hang out. And we've really kind of said, if you're not on the house, don't try not to hang out. And, so that...
to protect the families.
Yeah, mainly to protect the families and try to prevent any, just in case someone would have it. So that's really cut into the feeling of community life and kind of some of those benefits. So,
yeah.
How do you see working with that? Because, that seems like a general trend for all of America for maybe the future. Community is tough when you're scared to be around other people.
Yeah, I guess thank goodness for Zoom. We just adjusted to what we could. We had a social gather. Did we have a social gathering during?
No, we haven't. We used to sometimes try to get together for kind of a yearly weekend get-together or retreat, or we used to try to do things on a yearly basis where we might try to get other people to watch the house for the weekend, or sometimes if there was a lull and maybe there's only a couple families and we were waiting to fill some rooms, we might kind of just get them hotel rooms and close down the house for the weekend, and so that we could all get together and really kind of do a deeper dive into how each of us are doing. And we have our weekly meeting where we could say we could improve things this way, but really taking a weekend to really dive in is where we would, on a yearly basis, make bigger changes and improvements to how we're working, how we handle issues in the community. And so that part has been missing, and I'm not sure when we'll get back to it. That's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Same here in real life, too. Yeah. We're going to do our best.
One thing I wanted to bring up is that if anyone wants to become a Catholic worker at Casa Maria, you're not required to be Catholic. So I think
Yeah, how big of
Lincoln
a-
and I just happen to be the two Catholics speaking to you today, but the rest of the group is not. There are not.
I don't think we might be the only
only two.
two practicing Catholics
wow.
at the moment. So you happen to get the lottery of Catholics. But
We
God,
have
I
people
felt some
from many
guilt.
different walks of life, and that's what makes us awesome as well.
it's a mix. Some Catholic worker communities, I'd say those that want to stress like a more regular prayer life as part of their community living stay usually more Catholic or Christian. And we do, well, not since COVID. We used to have a weekly prayer service that was kind of just optional for anyone around if they wanted to come. But I know when I first joined the community, it was almost completely Catholic. But I think as we kind of shifted away from that, that people there's no expectation that you come to the prayer service and it's not a requirement to be, it was never a requirement to be Catholic, but maybe just because everyone was Catholic, it just kind of seemed that way.
Self-selecting.
Yeah, but I think as we've kind of moved away from that, it's also helped diversify the community so that it's, when I first was there, it was almost completely white. And now it's more of a mix of white and black and Latinx, or I don't know, I'll use that term for now.
That's fine.
Yeah, I never know which one to use.
See, one of the things I'm happiest about when I joined the when I joined the community, we didn't have many moms in the Catholic worker role. And now since I've been there for 5 years, we've had maybe something like 4 moms become workers with their children as live-in workers. And that makes me very proud that the current community has managed to, we've done something to invite the moms and make them encouraged to join our community. Yeah, it's tough for moms because the space, you share in community with your children, but also I just think it's a great role for moms to fill, and it's great for us to have moms in the position of consensus with us. So
what would a mom bring to the table that I wouldn't bring, or somebody not in those circumstances?
Or that I wouldn't
her
bring.
Perspective. Her perspective as a black mom with black children, or even if it were any race mom, being a mother is the most challenging thing on earth to do. It's probably harder than being an astronaut sometimes. So I think it's most definitely perspective. And it's just awesome.
Do you have any stories of anybody in particular you can think of who's transitioned into a live-in working role?
Well, we always know when when a mom would fit, and, it's nice to invite them. Some moms decline, and other moms, we just think it's a perfect way to invite them, and we never know we're never sure if they want to stay, because it is it's a challenging role sometimes. One in particular, there's, and she didn't stay long. There was just a mom right before COVID who we loved her. We couldn't get enough of her. And she ended up staying. And when she was on a wait list for low-income housing, there'll be in the community, there's sometimes spurts of low-income housing that'll come out. And so she found her own housing, and we were very happy to see her transition independently into her low-income unit. And so that's a good story, is that when you see families transition to affordable housing, that, that's the best part of what we do, I think, is instead of feeling like they left to some slumlord and, the rent rate is too high to afford, and they'll eventually be unable to pay their rent again and back on the streets. So that's probably the best story, is a mom who transitioned to her own affordable housing.
Is it?
Yeah. So one of the issues that Dean Spade talks about in his book Mutual Aid is that traditional charities and government programs sometimes don't help people that are seen as maybe unworthy because of some of the preconceived ideas that we have the poor and people in need. I was wondering, has your organization been able to help any members of the community that maybe weren't able to find help at other organizations because of some preconceived notions?
Yeah, I guess the story that stands out the most for me, and Lincoln's been around over 20 years.
Still looks young though.
Is a mom with 9 kids showed up to the doorsteps of Child Protective Services here in Milwaukee. And instead of this agency finding money for her to rent, like a voucher for a rent deposit in first month rent or 2 months rent, they decided it was best to remove each child. And mom was still homeless anyways. And so the kids were in the system about a year, and this mom's lawyer at the Children's Courthouse had known about the housing that we offer to families. And she asked her mom to come by us and apply. And we thought her case, we definitely wanted to help her. We didn't know what we would do with so many kids out in one flat, but we wanted to see this family reunified, which eventually happened. So with our one flat, we were able to help this family get back together. And here you have this government agency being paid $1,300 each kid each month. That's like $250,000 that they profited from the family for the duration of the case. It was about a 2-year case or longer. And it makes me lose respect for the powers that be who are pumping all this money into child welfare, a policing system. And they're policing families and separating them. And with what little we have, we're able to reunify, their mistake or what they're making is a bigger problem. The children suffer when they're in foster homes. The risk of abuse is prevalent, right? There were times when the mom was having visits with the children. Since she didn't have the children in her custody, she doesn't get food share benefits for them. So there was a point where she was keeping the kids overnight, and the agencies didn't have a way to help her get funding for food. So Casa Maria was paying it. So here goes this agency receiving millions of dollars, and they're not factoring a way to reunify the family. They only have a way to provide funding to separate the families.
I think this was kind of just based on assumptions that they made about the kind of person she was, just based on her
I think it was an opportunity for them, and their excuse is that the federal government doesn't have funding to house them. That's their excuse.
But didn't you just say it was $250,000 in 2 years?
Yep.
So you think about it, affordable housing, $20,000 over 2 years.
Exactly.
Could have saved a family, could have kept a family together.
It was also in their power. They don't seem inclined to do this. They do have a budget to give out, as Amada mentioned, housing vouchers or, to help with first month's rent and deposit. So they could have just given her a housing voucher for probably about $2,000, and she would have been able to get housing and the case would have been over. But once they removed the kids, then and then not only because it's 9 kids in this instance, I believe they were in 3 separate homes.
Yep.
So they were not only separated from mom, but they're separated from each other. And so, and there's been a lot of social science work on child separation from their parents and the harm and health problems, mental and physical health problems that they'll most likely have later on in life that could have been prevented and done more cheaply. And so that's where, I'm definitely proud to be part of a place like Casa Maria and a place where Amada's involved, where we can help at least correct these wrongs, because that could have ended up being a case which was even worse. I mean, I think without us being involved, it's very likely some of the kids would have been adopted out eventually.
Yeah, there's a time limit in foster care. It's 15 months. So as soon as 15-month clock runs out from the day the kids are removed at the initial hearing that a mom gets, and that's 48 hours after the children are taken, they go to court. 15 months after that day, the district attorney's office can file to terminate a parent's rights. It's really hard to reverse the trajectory of adoption after they file. You're up against some lawyers who are very pro-adoption in the city, in the county, and you're up against you got this one single poor mom up against like a middle-class adopted family, usually white, from the suburbs. So it's pretty irreversible once the 15-minute time limit is hit. And so this mom and the 9 children were at great danger. So usually what happens is the foster care program puts the mom under a lot of pressure. The judge orders many conditions, and at the same time, you have to find a way to survive. You don't qualify for the benefits that you would survive if you have your children, but you still have to show up with a way to feed your children at visits, transportation, and then you're juggling the conditions, conditions are usually like something like parenting classes.
Yeah.
If you're a domestic violence victim, you're forced to go through classes, which is wrong because the batterer should be going through classes, not the victim. You're forced to if you have any drug or alcohol concerns, if the government feels that that's a safety concern, usually you're ordered to do that. So there's no way to keep a job.
I was going to say that's 10,
and
15
maintain
hours of
housing.
obligations.
Yeah. So for any mom and a mom with 9 kids, it's just puts a ton of strain and mental strain on women and dads as well. And so what we do, we try to eliminate as many barriers and stress for the moms. We're sure that they have housing, utilities, toiletries, and house goods, and also internet, and support and coaching, and moral support. So we also attend court with the moms. And so, yeah, we don't know where this family would be, and it's tough already, being a mom and to be always facing the risk. This mom had no drug, domestic violence, or mental health concerns. It was purely a homelessness concern.
So that was the reason.
That was the only reason. So that was the other thing that was very frustrating about the case.
So is that something you commonly see, that kids are separated simply because of circumstances that are out of the parents' control?
Yes. I mean, there's so the two main case types are moms with cognitive disability, like have a low IQ, and then the other ones are domestic violence victims. And those 2 cases, it just makes no sense to take the kids in those. Well, in any case, I just feel like we could do more to eliminate safety concerns with all the money floating around. Mm-hmm. But homelessness is basically the number one reason. And we all know that rents are being raised, and, the welfare system is almost non-existent. So a lot of the cases are due to homelessness because you can't get your kids back if you have nowhere to take them. So then the time limits run out, and before you know it, your kids are adopted out. So,
yeah. But I would say this is, at least at the moment, the primary race issue that we're involved in, especially addressing anti-Black racism. At least when statistically, and for anyone that works in child welfare or has connections to CPS, this is no secret. It's just not as well known by the general public. And that's, when a CPS investigator goes in to decide, is this a child victim? Do I believe there's a substantiated allegation of abuse? A Black child is twice as likely to be considered a victim of child maltreatment than a white child, and then about 3 to 4 times more likely to be removed from the home. And so I would kind of equate this similar to what we see happening with policing, where you see police officers who shoot or kill someone and they say, well, it was a black man, I felt afraid. And they seem to feel a lot more afraid if there's even an unarmed black man than if there's an armed white man. And I think we see the same thing, a similar thing with CPS investigators. I believe, based on the statistics, that if you took a set of investigators, if you could do a study like this, bring them into a dwelling and tell half of them that this is a dwelling for a black family, or tell half of them this is a dwelling for a white family. And I believe, at least what the statistics now bear out, more of them believe it's a black family would say this is a dangerous situation where we need to remove the children compared to the white family situation. But it's really arbitrary how these decisions get made. And so just one last thing here from my end to kind of explain the arbitrariness of how the CPS system works. So to use I don't want to get too bogged down in statistics, but when it comes to foster care statistics, they'll often talk about per 1,000 children. And so when it comes to children who are placed in foster care that are removed from the home, our latest statistics from 2020 are 2.2 children per 1,000 were removed from the home in New Jersey. So 2.2 in New Jersey, and 19 children per 1,000 in West Virginia. So essentially we're saying parents must be about
tenfold.
About 10 times worse in West Virginia than in New Jersey. The other part of this, they do statistics on reunification. How likely are you, once you've been removed, to actually be reunited with your biological parents? So the national average is about 50%, but in Delaware, only 24% of children are reunited with their parents. So most, does that mean Delaware has the worst parents, or people that can't meet what they're supposed to do to get their kids back? But in South Carolina, 71% of children are reunited with their biological parents. And not to put anything bad on South Carolina, but I wouldn't, if someone said, what state has the best parents? Probably not choosing South Carolina.
Doesn't pop in my head. Top 5, you're right.
Yeah, I'm sure there are wonderful people in South Carolina, but I just think these statistics don't actually speak to whether one state has bad parents or good parents. It speaks to the arbitrariness of how the court systems work in those states, how the child welfare system works as a whole.
And it has a lot to do with the privatization of the program for child welfare in the state. So child welfare wasn't always privatized in Milwaukee. In the 80s and 90s, the county ran it, and you didn't see as many kids adopted out back then.
In child welfare, is that CPS?
Yes.
So CPS is private?
In Milwaukee, the agencies that conduct what they call case management for foster care, they are privatized companies.
Does that sound crazy to anybody else? That sounds wild to me.
Yeah. And what's even more wild is that Children's Hospital is one of the 2 companies that manages child welfare, and they are an adoption agency, and they dominate pediatric care around the state.
So
I'm getting
they're
the
kind of incentivized to do more.
Very much so. So a lot of people don't know this, but when a foster child is adopted, it's a subsidized adoption, which means that the adopters can receive up to $2,000 each month until the child turns 18, depending on the age, the race, and whether or not they adopt the siblings. So adoption is very much incentivized, and helping families stick together is absolutely not. There's like zero funding towards that.
So before you said there are a lot of pro-adoption people in the city that make your job harder. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, do you think that's mainly because of the financial incentives, or are there other reasons that people are very pro-adoption?
Well, it is. I think that there are people who adopt privately and they pay out of pocket, But I believe that it's very much a money thing, that you see this trend of removals because the money and the funding is there, and people may feel good about themselves if they're adopting an inner city kid, but ethically, it's not a good thing to fight a poor single mom over her child when you're the one being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, because you also get these great tax credits and benefits once you adopt a child or have a child in your placement. That, so it's just the inner city moms are providing children for people who can't have kids, and then the people who can't have kids are more privileged but receiving all the money to raise the children. But poor moms aren't good enough to receive anything from our society to raise their own children.
So these people might think they're doing a good thing, but actually it's damaging.
And that's the marketing. Be a hero. Save an inner city foster kid.
And I think, when most people think of child maltreatment, they think of child abuse. But about 76% of all, at least what are considered child victims, are placed under the category of neglect. And I think in our experience, we would say neglect is just another word for poverty. Like they're saying, oh, this mom or these parents aren't providing properly, at least according to my standards as a middle-class white social worker checking out this situation. So one, there's the bias of the worker, but also there is, the very forced, simple living of the person who's just trying to eke out a living that they can make in the city of Milwaukee as a person of color.
What poverty actually looks like. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Amada, is that why some of these arbitrary differences come in of African-American kids are 4 times more likely to be taken out of the home? Does that come from the social workers themselves? Is that an implicit bias of them? Or is it just kind of wrapped up in the whole who takes those jobs? It's nothing personal. It's just, I'm not used to that.
Well, probably 98% of the workers that I see are white suburban middle class women without children.
Gotcha.
And so sometimes there's workers I don't meet because they don't have caseloads with problems. But usually I'll meet like this young middle class white woman, and she's behind a huge group of moms who are having problems. They find out about me, and it's always the same workers. So I think I could be mistaken, but all of the problems come down from someone who doesn't share a perspective with the poor mom.
Who's not lived in that kind of house before.
Correct. Who doesn't have a mom with the same perspectives. Because if you were raised that way, then you would have more compassion and sympathy, and you'd find real help for the family.
Yeah. That's the saddest part to me, because I think those young do-gooder white ladies are trying to do good. They really think they are.
Yeah.
And we're all just putting our
they just don't
energy
have
in the wrong direction.
Yeah, they just don't have it. They just don't have the experience and perspective, and that's a huge flaw, because it hurts a lot of children.
I bet. Well, let's give all of them this podcast and widen their perspective a little bit. We'll be good.
So what kind of things does Casa Maria do to address this?
The CPS issue?
Yeah.
I mean, the two of the houses providing housing, but also then Amada's a workhorse.
we thanks to Casa Maria, I'm able to receive moms and dads and grandparents as well. A lot of grandparents are fighting to get placement of their grandkids, and aunts and uncles as well. So what we do, we used to have support group going on at Casa Maria, but what happens is it's just another meeting that the parents have to do when they already have so many requirements and appointments to take to get their kids back. So what we do, we decided to do this one-on-one coaching. So what happens is a mom calls us up. We find out their court date. We find out what kind of hearing it is. So we'll meet people in all sorts of stages of their case. People who just are having their kids removed, people who are afraid they might have their kids removed, and people who are maybe too late to help. And we still try to help. It's very difficult though, because when it's too late, it's just hard for us to devote so much energy in a losing case, but it's so hard to walk away at the same time from a person who needs some support.
Still just a mom.
What we do then, we try to strategize what are the safety concerns that the government is accusing you of and eliminate them. So everyone knows that we have the houses. We don't have housing for every family in the world, but we'll try to find a way to solve whatever safety concerns the government has for the family. We'll use the resources that we have to eliminate those safety concerns. And that helps the mom's lawyers approach the other lawyers and judge during court time. And they'll say, you see, this mom now has housing. She's accomplished her domestic violence class, and she's done parenting, and all of that is done. The moms, they work so hard. They're amazing people. And, you know, it's so hard to be in this type of situation. I couldn't even imagine. And to have someone support you, the moms usually thank us just for being present. So we just find a way to support them and coach them and help them strategize to win their case, help them help their lawyers. And that's what we do. So,
how's the one-on-one thing going?
It goes well. You know why? I'm the luckiest because we get to stay in touch with the moms for lifelong. So like some of the kids, they're like the baby we saved from the hospital, because there was this one baby, he just turned 4, and he wasn't taken from the hospital because we were able to intervene, and he's with mom and his siblings. So it's pretty cool that we get to, I just have so many friends and their moms in the community. Yeah.
So yeah. Do you end up becoming friends with a lot of these people?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
People you help?
Yeah. Our moms, they're like sisters because you have this special connection. You know, you've been through the worst with each other, and they, even though I haven't been in their shoes, it's really, I think they connect with me because we're able to understand that they need the help, whereas other people shun them or say, you must have done something to be in this situation. We're like the first people they ever meet to say, oh man, it must be tough to survive this system. How can we help you? So we become best friends, I think. There's cases where moms lose and we're not able to help them. And those things, I think, are very tragic. And those also are bad things that stick with us too. Because you think about those moms, if you don't see, like I have a mom who lost 7 kids and I don't know where she is, you know? And so those things hurt as well. So
I bet, yeah, after that.
Yeah. cry and sometimes you can find people on social media, but you know, you just do what you can and try to help moms win every case possible by eliminating safety what the government sees as a safety concern.
And what is a safety concern exactly? Is that like outlets being exposed? Is that
sometimes it is. I feel like the safety concerns that they have, the government isn't trying to help anyone solve the safety concern. They're just pointing it out. And they're supposed to help. Yeah. That's what the judge tells them. You're supposed to help the mom.
Oh. But
they're not. And they're not supposed to take kids due to poverty. And they do. You know? So the system is just, I hate when people say it's a broken system. Because it's not, it was invented to be broken.
It's running pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What does being Superwoman at the courthouse look like?
Everyone there hates me.
Oh, no.
I fear my life.
Except the moms.
Except the moms. The DA's office hates me. The judges like us sometimes because they're like, hey, here are these group of people who are, you know, showing up for the families to solve problems. But the DA's office can't stand me.
Yeah, you used to not be allowed in many courtrooms, but now if the mom wants you in there, it's still up to the judge, but most judges will let you in there to support the mom at her request.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
funny.
It's still, even then, I can be vetoed out by the lawyers. But yeah.
Do you think about that much, or you just say, we're on
yeah,
different teams?
If we're kicked out, then we just still will ask the lawyers after court, like, hey, what does the mom need? And we'll talk about it.
My help.
Yeah. So we find ways around being kicked out of court. But generally speaking, like Lincoln said, the judges try to let us support the parents and know what the parents need. It's very hard to be in a courtroom and be a single mom and you're upset. You don't hear the things that your advocate can hear and point out to you later. So
even as we record podcasts, I have a hard time thinking of things to say when there's silence afterwards. I'm already trying to think of what to say. So I'm imagining in a courtroom, foreign language, big, high words.
Yep.
Yeah.
Legal jargon.
Hella confusing.
And the process, So for 12 years, we've been ironing out how women go through the process. And when we get a mom who's new to, who's recently had their kids removed, we're like, okay, this is what to expect. So we kind of know what to do when a mom is just entering the system.
Yeah, I can't imagine how difficult it must be to navigate this system without someone to help you.
And the lawyers, I used to have a really bad perspective on lawyers, and I was passing judgment, but I don't see how the lawyers can sit down and be very legal minded in court and then out of court, take the time to explain things to moms. Also, the moms don't trust the lawyers, but they'll trust us. Like if we'll say, hey, but look at it from this lawyer's perspective, they need you to do this. And then the moms are like, oh, okay, yeah, it doesn't seem fair, but we're doing it for legal purposes. So it's very confusing process. And nothing they teach us in civics class in high school.
I think. Yeah. I think, Amada had mentioned, the system isn't broken. It was built this way. And, just to give a brief historical perspective, welfare and child protective services are intertwined in their history. Welfare was essentially created during the Great Depression because people felt for all these poor white moms who were having trouble raising their kids and sometimes losing their kids. But, so that it was that push that helped get welfare for white moms, because it was mainly up to the states. So especially the reason that southern states went along with it is they knew they could exclude black mothers. And then really up until the civil rights movement in the late 50s, early 60s, CPS was either more for kids who were orphans. So especially like during the early 20th century, you actually did have a lot more orphans, moms who died in childbirth, dads who died in World War I. So you did have a lot of orphans. By 1960, there are not many orphans in the United States anymore, at least compared to the early 20th century.
Sure.
But and foster care up until that point was mainly voluntary. Like if a mom just felt like she needed to get to work and she couldn't take care of her kids by herself at home, it was it was a government program where she could have her kids placed there for maybe 6 months, and then she'd kind of got everything set, got a new place to stay, and then she'd like, I'm ready to get my kids back. Mostly voluntary program. With the civil rights movement in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s, this is also leading to court cases where black mothers are now starting to get welfare en masse in the South. And oddly enough, it seems to coincide with CPS and foster care taking a more involuntary route, and the federal government passing laws that states can only receive foster care funds for involuntary placement. It's no longer available for voluntary placement. And so we do, our current state of foster care and CPS is directly tied to race and the civil rights movement.
Yeah. Also, what happened with welfare in the 90s, the Clintons, they privatized welfare. So welfare went from what was called the AFDC program to what is now the TANF. program. And TANF allows for welfare dollars to be used to pay the workers in the foster care system and to pay private agencies to conduct social services. And so these private agencies can use those dollars to pay themselves and not pay to help the families. So welfare was totally the funding source for what's going on right now in foster care.
And one of the sister bills of the of welfare reform of the mid 90s with Clinton was also, there was another bill that was passed right around that time that made it easier, that basically cleared the path for what they call transracial adoptions. Up until that time period, the courts really the case would have to be more egregious to place a black child with a white family. Up until then, the courts really wanted to focus on, realizing that a black child being sent out to the suburbs where now they're surrounded by all white people and raised there, this could be traumatic. And those parents might not have the tools to, help that child deal with the racism of the suburbs. But now there's a bill that's passed that says judges no longer can even take race into account when it comes to foster placement and especially adoptions. And so that tied with welfare funds drying up or at least being severely limited, we see again this close connection.
Yeah, so you can see why it's impossible for Casa Maria to avoid this cause. And Casa Maria has done all they can to be sure that someone's out here in the community facing these issues with the moms and dads.
I was going to say, it sounds like nobody else is. Nobody else is incentivized to.
There are other activists who do devote their time.
Especially in different pockets of the United States, there are there are definitely activist groups, often made up of moms who've kind of, in mutual aid to each other, provided support and worked against the problems that they've faced and wanted to provide resources for other moms now facing it. So
yeah, especially in Philly and LA, and the moms group is run in Seattle is much better. And then the Bronx Defenders in New York. There's also a great writer, Richard Wexler. And so this is a nationwide problem. And Casa Maria is just we're doing our best to help the community here locally. And I wish there were more people helping because it is very daunting. That sometimes someone wants to plaster my number on a billboard. I'm like, I can't, please don't. Because there's so many
have so much time.
people, in need. But I think that it's just I think that Casa Maria just found it necessary to devote the 2 properties. And it really increased the success rate for our parents once the courts knew that we had a place for them to stay and transition. What we do is we try to help the moms transition to low-income housing because we just want CPS off their backs. And that's the best way is if moms can find safe housing, then the safety concerns are eliminated.
You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. So if there were more housing vouchers in low-income housing units, there are like none in Milwaukee. So the moms usually move to very rural areas, and it gets depressing too to be out there. But they're so happy to have their own housing that a lot of moms do it because they just want to get away from CPS.
So the more we talk about this, the more my brain is getting blown by how messed up these incentive structures are for everybody. And I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you what magic wand would wave it all and make it better. But are there a couple things that we should be striving for to untangle this system of weird incentives that don't focus on the family, don't focus on keeping children with their mothers?
Yeah, the money, it's all about the dollars coming from the federal level.
Yeah.
And also the Adoption Act that it enforces, it's not a law or anything, it's just it enforces the government to get the kids adopted out within 15 months.
Setting up an incentive to get out.
All the kids and the children come back to their families, but they're traumatized. So it's like we see all these kids coming back from the suburbs and they're like, well, we're 18 now. We got kicked out. We don't belong there. So, that's what I wish could happen. That's my wish, is that the money would get somehow dispersed to the families instead of these privileged families who, it's just ironic, the irony in seeing, okay, these middle class, lighter people are qualified to get welfare, but this poor single Black mom, she doesn't deserve it. So, because it's still welfare money. It's at the end of the day, it's the TANA funds. So it's really crazy. It really blows my mind. Like I'm living in the Twilight Zone every day. But yeah, it would be if I could reverse something, I think it would be on a federal level. And of course, good luck with that.
Yeah. On the local level, if anyone listening happens to be provides funds to Children's Hospital.
Correct.
I would.
They have enough money. Please don't.
Through the foster care, adoption, and other related contracts, they get millions and millions of dollars every year. I would say don't write that check and call them and let them know why and say they need to give up their CPS contract. And advocate that it be returned back to the county. I think that would allow for more transparency. And because then if there is an issue with CPS, I could actually go to my county supervisor. But now the county really has almost nothing to do with it.
Nothing, yeah.
And so, I can't, if I have an issue with CPS, it's not like I call, there's not a
legislator to call.
And there's no hotline at Children's Hospital to say, like, I have an issue with what's going on here, this worker, it's... So anyways, I think on a local level, that privatization aspect is very problematic.
That is so interesting to me. I can't believe that happens. And how else can we get involved? I was looking on your website and I saw three things where if you know how to run or organize a donation drive at your house or neighborhood with your friends, get together, pull in all these different items. I saw some of the items on there that you guys are looking for right now. Box fans, 33-gallon garbage bags, pizzas, combs, brushes, cleaners, plates, knives, forks, fruit, and all of that is on an Amazon wish list. Don't love Amazon, but what are you going to do? Makes it convenient. Some of the things you don't need, which I kind of laughed about, I was imagining some people bringing the same stuff over and over again so you get the same boxes of things. Raisins and peanut butter and jelly. No more. We have enough.
We have to give that away. We have it, and we're always trying to find places to give it away to.
Non-perishable, though.
That's true, but
and the problem,
it would take over our basement if we never got rid of any of the peanut butter that came in.
You can find a link to that in the description of this episode as well.
But yeah, though, if anyone ever wants to themselves bring those types of items down, or in their neighborhood, church, wherever, your workplace, that's wonderful. We're always looking for anyone who has skills in carpentry, or maybe if the pandemic ever ends, there are folks that come by and maybe cook a meal once a month. That could be a family or a couple families, and that's a way. Sometimes people say, "Oh, it'd be nice to meet some of the families," and we don't want to be a zoo, But if someone's willing, if someone's willing to bring a meal, oftentimes cook it there, then, and we always, everyone who works there and lives there sits down together for supper, and having a conversation over a meal is a lot different than, hey, I walked in the door, can I meet some kids? Or, you're actually doing something that really is helpful for us. And then it could be an opportunity for people to
and you can interact with us organically by that way. So we try to protect the moms and children from visitors that way, that we're sure that it's a natural visiting process.
If you're going to come to the community, come be a part of it for a little bit. Don't gawk and stare.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it would happen. But you forgot to mention we do need a tree cutter too right now.
We do.
Otherwise, Lincoln will be cutting down the
No, it won't be me. I got my trimmer out the other day, and I'm like, oh, this is
too much.
I should have been trimming this a year ago. It's got away from us, and we do need a couple trees taken down that are too close to one of our houses.
So any lumberjacks out there, give Lincoln a call.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, other than that, guys, anything you want to say before we sign off?
You know, you had mentioned before stories, and I think this is a short story, but when I first got there, and you know, we still take single women, but there was a single woman that was staying at Casa Maria, and you know, I always wondered, would she have been allowed back at another place if, you know, at your typical regular homeless shelter, if it was the same type of thing? Like, we do keep cards, like someone was here last, what were there, you know, if there were any issues, concerns, things that could be helped out with. And, you know, this is a single woman that I checked her in, she called, she needed a place to stay. I, you know, I saw she's been here like 4 times before, has drug issues, drug addiction issues, but the space was there, so, you know, no one else had called for it, so we had her stay there. And I think because of her drug issues, and she'd been in and out of jail, and she was a woman, I mean, now I'm in my mid-40s. At that, I would have been... And... Okay. Yeah, so I'll call her Barbara. She called looking for space. We happened to have the space, and I looked at her card. She had been there before. You know, she had drug addiction issues. She'd been in and out of prison. You know, and I did question, I wonder if, you know, if she had called kind of your typical shelter, would she have been allowed in, or would they have said, let's just save the room for someone we might actually be able to help? But the space was there, and we didn't have any policy, you know, saying, well, you've been here four times is too many. So, you know, she came by, checked her in, and she was staying there. And, you know, for her, it was a real tough time. She's, a woman in her mid-40s, scattered work history, prison record, but she was clean. She was staying clean. She was real open about how addiction issues is something she'd struggled with her whole adult life. But after she'd been there the first month, and like no one would hire her anywhere because of her history, and she was starting to, feel real down about it. And I think it was around week 6 that all of a sudden there was some place on the east side, kind of a communal living situation, where they needed someone to do food prep. And really, it did not sound like the greatest job. It wasn't the greatest pay. But when she came home that night, she was just so excited that someone was willing to give her a chance. And so, she stayed for about another 6 weeks, saved up enough money, moved out, and then it was probably like 2 years later. At that time, Casa Maria is about 5-6 blocks north of Wisconsin Avenue on 21st Street. So I'd taken the 30 bus, got off on Wisconsin, and I was walking in front of an apartment building, and she's sitting out front with her boyfriend. She's like, Lincoln. And we started talking, and she had gotten a better paying job. But when you have, as we all know, it's easier to get a job when you have a job. Mm-hmm. And she had an apartment, and she'd stayed clean. So it's one of those stories that is always stuck with me, that this is a woman that I think, earlier we talked about how some people will refer to the unworthy poor. I think she would have been considered the unworthy poor that had used up all of her chances, but really she just needed one more chance. And with that chance, she was able to, create what, we talked for about 30 minutes before I kept walking back home to Casa Maria at the time. But, she was at a point in her life where she was real happy. And as she said, she was the happiest she'd been as an adult. Things are going right for her. So as being a part of Casa Maria has allowed me to be a part of stories like that are just, it's just a blessing to be a part of.
That's amazing.
That's a beautiful story. And probably exactly what you're hoping happens every time.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And sometimes when I always have to remember, if it doesn't end that way every time, that's just that person's second time. Like
You're going to catch them on their fourth time.
yeah, in this world, unfortunately, where there's so many difficulties and so many things that can be working against you, people just need that extra chance to get things right, and I'm very happy to be a part of that.
Very good for your mental health to know there's someone out there who understands your perspective and cares.
Isn't that all we're looking for? A little bit of love to be understood and heard. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you guys for sitting down and talking to us.
Great conversation.
Yes, thank you, Will, Daniel. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.